called Disability is Not Lack of Ability. This is a story by Sostine Samson Mufune. So it reads, a few years ago, a woman by the name Sostine Mufune observes something which has refused to leave her mind. Together with her son, they had turned the largest bedroom in their house to be a music studio. They recorded singing groups and short videos, and due to their quality productions, their clientele grew very quickly. One day, they were to shoot a video of a children's group from one of the schools in town. There were 15 of those children between the age groups of 8 and 12 years. The children were going to mime the song. And when they arrived at Sustine's house, they stood in the sitting room before proceeding to the studio. Then Sustine's son shook the teacher's hand and began to explain the logistics of the video tapping. The children were filled with so much excitement, one kid even interrupted and asked, "Is this a studio?" So the son answered, "No, it's not." After the son was done explaining, he asked them to follow him into the studio. Sostine watched the kids almost tripping all over each other as they hurriedly followed her son into the studio. Then she saw one boy who momentarily appeared to hesitate, not knowing where to go. While she was wondering as to what was going on because he looked very normal, she noticed another boy reach for the hand of the hesitant boy, and they both followed the others into the studio. The boy was blind. Sostine then followed them. When they arrived in the studio, her son said as he pointed at his colleague, who was also helping him, "My friend and I will do the video tapping." The kids exchanged excited glances. Then Sostine stood next to their teacher. Her son pointed at two walls in the studio. One was painted green and the other one was painted blue. He told them that they would be filming their song in front of the green wall. Then now the kids gave each other a puzzled look. Sostine's son smiled and asked if they were wondering about the green and the blue colors. All the kids nodded their heads in agreement that they didn't understand. So as the son explained to the group, Sostine noticed the boy who had led his friend in the studio continuously whispering into his friend's ear, probably trying to paint a picture in his friend's mind as to what was being discussed. The boy who was leading the blind boy interrupted her son and asked, "Can my friend touch the green wall?" Then Sostine's son agreed. The boy who was blind was led by his friend to the wall. As his hand moved on the wall, a smile curved his lips and he nodded his head in approval. The teacher whispered into Sostine's ear and told her that the boy caught smallpox when he was still young, when he was still a year old, and that left him blind. Sostine's son explained that as human beings, we don't have blue and green colors in our bodies. And so when films are being shot in front of green or blue backgrounds, it enables the producers to overlay any picture they want on the background. He explained that since their song mentioned different children of the world, once they were done with the shooting and while doing the editing, the producers would be able to put pictures of the children mentioned in the song in the background, and it would appear as if they were in those different countries. So there were smiles of satisfaction on the kids' faces, and one kid even said, "We are going to be famous." They all had a hearty laugh. Sostine's son looked at the teacher and said, "Your song has someone singing solo. So I want the soloist to stand on the marked black dot on the floor, and the rest of the group will stand over the other side." Then Sostine saw the boy leading his blind friend to the spot of the soloist. She looked at the teacher in amazement, and she nodded her head and whispered, "He has a very beautiful voice." The teacher left Sostine and walked to the choir to help organize them. And also Sostine's son explained that the lights would come on and he would count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then he would say, "Take one." And when they hear their soundtrack, they should start singing as directed by the teacher. So the children nodded their heads in agreement. Sustain's son and his colleague they stood behind their cameras and they put the lights on. And as Sustain's son was about to do the count, then the blind boy raised his hand and said, "Can I say something?" Then the son nodded his head in approval, but he quickly remembered that, oh, no, I can't nod because the boy can't see me. He is blind. So he quickly said, "Yes, go ahead." Then all eyes turned to the blind boy. Timidly, he said, "All this talk about colors just reminded me of the red color, the blood of Jesus. I am told that the blood, the color of the blood is red. My parents told me the other day that when Jesus was on earth, he healed the crippled, he raised the dead, and even restored sight to the blind. One of the blind people he restored his sight was the blind Bartimaeus." He paused for a moment and said, "It's his dying on the cross that gives me hope that one day my eyesight will be restored. I'll be able to see my parents, my siblings, my teacher, and my classmates. I'll see my friends who help me at school. I really want to see Jesus come quickly." Then he just rolled his head aimlessly around and said, "I'm sorry for taking your time. I just had to share that." In that moment, Sostine's son took a deep breath and smiled and said, "We definitely want Jesus to come quickly." And then he went back to, what he had to do, the counting, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, take one. And there was beautiful music that filled the whole studio. So as the blind boy sang his solo, tears just started pouring down on Sostine's eyes as she said to herself, "Disability is not lack of ability. Lord, come quickly indeed." This is our mission story for the day. And
So everyone can make a difference. A caregiver takes care of an elderly person. A widow gets involved with feeding the homeless. A widower prays for the missionaries all around the world. An orphan gets invited to play with a neighbor's kid. A paralytic in a wheelchair reveals a smiling face to those in contact. A person with mental illness writes uplifting poems to encourage others. A person who is blind directs and leads a summer camp. A deaf person studies theology at a college aiming to be a pastor to preach the gospel in sign language. And what do all these special individuals have in common? They all have possibilities. Each one has a possibility. Nothing stops them, even with the challenges they have. Today is Adventist Possibility Ministries Awareness Day, also known as Special Needs Day, that the General Conference has set aside once each year. There are 7 ministries within the Adventist Possibility Ministries umbrella, and they are caregiver, widower, orphan, physical and mental challenged, blind, and deaf. We're going to look at several Bible stories that include each one of these 7 ministries. There are 2 sides of the view of each story. One is a person with a challenge, and the other is a person who has compassion. Listen carefully, because all these apply to each and every one of us. So the first story is about David and Mephibosheth. The story is found in 2 Samuel chapter 9. So we're going to start with verse 1. In verse 1 it says, "Now David said, is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" As most of us know, David and Jonathan were best friends. But Jonathan's father was jealous of David that he had been the anointed king. that God had chosen, and he had been trying to kill David for many years. Unfortunately, Jonathan and Saul had been killed in a battle some years ago. So now David wanted to show kindness to Jonathan's family. So we can see that David wanted to show kindness to Jonathan's family, not only because it was his best friend, but because of the promise that David had made to Saul, to Jonathan. And we can find this promise in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 14 to 17. And it says, "And you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord require it at the hand of David's enemies." Now Jonathan again caused David to vow, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Carrying on with the story, we are at verse 3 now of 2 Samuel chapter 9. It says, "Then the king said, Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." So the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." So here we can see that Jonathan had a son, and he had been unfortunately injured some years back when his caretaker was running away with him during the wartime, and it had caused Jonathan's son to be lame in both feet. So here we can now understand that Mephibosheth is crippled. That's the first challenge that he had. And people with defected bodies are considered not equal with able-bodied people. They are downcasted from society. I doubt the son was able to walk normally, not even run, jump with excitement, but he probably could go around using crutches. And if a wheelchair was invented during that time, he could probably be able to use it to move himself around. Carrying on with 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 4 and 5 says, "So the king said to him, Where is he? And Ziba said to the king, Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel in Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo-debar. So the second challenge that we see Mephibosheth struggling with is that he was an orphan, because he had lost his father and possibly a mother, because he was currently under the house of Machir and his family. An orphan since the age of 5, but now he is a man and he has his own son. A child is considered an orphan if he loses a parent or both parents. In addition to that, as a physically challenged person, someone would have to be a caregiver to Mephibosheth. Someone would have to lift Mephibosheth in and out of bath, carry him up and down the stairs, cook meals for him, take him on errands. It's not an easy task. So the household of Machir must have served as a caregiver for Mephibosheth. In addition to these challenges, Mephibosheth probably had a mental illness. As a 5-year-old who had lost his family members during war, it must have been devastating for him. Did he have suicidal thoughts? Did he desire revenge? Did he have anger problems? Was he unkind to those around him? Did he have depression, anxiety, feeling for himself, etc.? If we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 6. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, "Mephibosheth." And he answered, "Here is your servant." Verse 7. So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually." Here David had a kind heart. He wanted Mephibosheth to be a part of his life by inviting him over to eat at the king's table, not just once, but for a lifetime. At first, Mephibosheth was afraid because he wasn't sure if he would be welcomed by David. He could be killed right there by the king's orders, but that was not what David intended. Through God, he wanted to show kindness to Jonathan's son and treat him well. In addition to the privilege of eating at the king's table daily for life, David wanted to give the land that belonged to his grandfather Saul back to Mephibosheth. He wanted to treat him equally as one of his family members. To be fair, David felt obligated to keep the promise that he had made to his best friend Jonathan, that he would show kindness to his family. The point in this is that David had shown us how we need to treat others, even those who are different from us. We need to treat them in the same way we want to be treated. Now, what was Mephibosheth's response to David's offer? We find this verse 8 of 2 Samuel chapter 9. Then he bowed himself and said, What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? By his response, he was feeling grateful for the opportunity given to him by David. But because of the society surrounding him, he viewed himself as a dead dog. He felt that he was nothing important enough to be in the king's presence. A crippled, orphaned, probably mentally challenged man who needed special care. Who would want him? What would David say? Would he change his mind after he sees the challenges with Mephibosheth? Would David still want to show kindness to him? But we find our response in verse 9 and 11 to 11. And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul, and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Wow, because the land of Saul's was given to Mephibosheth, the king didn't want him to work in the field. I don't think it was because of his deformed feet. David considered Mephibosheth as one of his own sons. The king commanded that Ziba and his sons and servants work in the field to supply food. The entire household would have ample supply of food to eat, but Mephibosheth would always eat at the king's table. What an honor. The king didn't change his mind. He was determined to make a difference in Jonathan's son's life. This echoes in the last two verses of 2 Samuel chapter 9. And it says, Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. From being hopeless to being full of hope, from being a nobody to being a somebody, from being outside of society to being included in society, from being rejected to being accepted, from being a commoner to being the king's lifetime guest. It was the greatest upgrade anyone could ever receive. David has revealed what Christ would have done. There's a possibility in each person that he or she can make a difference to others for God. The second story is about Elisha and the widow, and we find this in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 to 7. Verse 1 says, One day the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come, threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves. The nameless woman had lost her husband, and she is now called a widow. Back then, it was not easy living as a widow because you lose your security and your income that you get from your husband. Today, it's still difficult in some countries as a widow or widower. In this story, the widow is facing the risk of losing her 2 sons to a creditor for unpaid bills. The only way to pay off the debts is by selling your children to a creditor. You wouldn't want to do that to your children, would you? All she had was a jar of oil and nothing else. Most of us know how the story ends. Through God, Elisha was able to rescue the woman and her sons, helping widows and widowers is greatly needed in many parts of the world. Some do receive governmental assistance, but others don't. Don't you think we need to be sensitive to their needs? We can all help them, right? The third story is about Jesus and Bartimaeus. We find this in Mark chapter 10, verse 46 to 52. Bartimaeus was sitting by the roadside begging. But when he heard that Jesus was coming, he shouted for Jesus to have mercy on him. Jesus heard and called for the blind man and asked him what he wanted. And we get the response in verse 51. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. My rabbi, the blind man said, I want to see. Of course, Jesus knew what Bartimaeus wanted, but he wanted to give him an opportunity to acknowledge his needs for a complete recovery. He wanted his sight. We find out what happens in verse 52. And Jesus said to him, Go, for your faith has healed you. Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road. There, Bartimaeus received his sight. He was healed. Imagine his reaction when the first thing he saw was Jesus. Jesus really cares, and we are to do the same. There are many people who are suffering, and they need us to provide them with hope. Then the last story for today is about Jesus and the deaf man. And we find this in Mark chapter 7, verse 31 to 37. Verse 32 says, A deaf man with a speech impediment was brought to him, and the people begged Jesus to lay his hands on the man to heal him. Apparently, the deaf man didn't know who Jesus was, but his friends did. Why? Because probably of the language barrier this man might have experienced. Maybe no one could communicate with him and tell him who Jesus was. Maybe he couldn't read and write. Maybe sign language was not used at that time. Anyway, the deaf man's friends were concerned, and they cared enough by bringing him to Jesus and begged him to heal him of his deafness. And of course, Jesus did. Verse 34 and 35 says, Looking up to heaven, he sighed and said, Ephata, which means be opened. Instantly the man could hear perfectly, and his tongue was freed so he could speak plainly. The deaf man was able to hear and speak for the first time. Through the deaf man's friends, Jesus made a difference in his life. In conclusion, millions of people around the world have some type of challenge in their lives, such as being a caregiver, widow or widower, orphan or physically and mentally challenged, blind or deaf. But no one is to be viewed as someone who cannot do anything because of their challenge. Instead, they are to be viewed as someone with possibilities. That is why the General Conference has recognized this huge need by forming the Adventist Possibilities Ministries to help spread awareness. People need hope, and they can be given hope. Everyone can do something for the Lord, whether it be by giving Bible studies, feeding the homeless, praying with the prisoners, being faithful, visiting those that need guidance, or just by smiling and making a difference in someone's life. Yes, we all can make a difference to others, no matter the challenges we face or the challenges they face. Will you be willing to make a difference for Jesus today? Thank you.